Welcome to the Tempo Storm Wild Meta Snapshot Breakdown. Following the Wild Open, the meta continues to develop, with the strongest decks shifting around significantly. With standard players coming over to play in this format, more decks are beginning to show up, continuing to diversify the meta. Some decks have fallen from the top and others have taken their spots. Before we jump into the breakdown of the tier list, make sure you're subscribed to the channel in order to keep up with the rest of our Hearthstone content. Without any further delays, let's jump right into Tier 1. Tier 1 is comprised of 7 decks, making it much larger than the first tier of the standard meta snapshot. Due to how many cards Wild has access to, the meta is much wider and the decks have a much larger power level. The first deck rounding off Tier 1 is Even Warlock. Even Warlock was previously in Tier 1, but was found a bit lower within it. Due to how flexible of a deck Even Warlock is, it's begun to prey on the meta. No matter what you find yourself queuing into, you can add a tech card to combat it. On top of this, many decks can't set up enough pressure to be faster than a 3-mana Mountain Giant. Even Warlock has a plethora of good matchups, but its best ones come from decks that can't stop the Giants early. reynad Warlock is bad at this, as it can't apply pressure and has limited removal for these threats. In order to beat Even Warlock, look to play decks with near endless removal such as Odd Warrior, or decks that have a fast aggressive strategy like Tempo Mage. Following Even Warlock is Kingsbane Rogue. Kingsbane was previously at the top of Tier 2, but with how the meta is shaping up, it finds itself increasing in power. The deck is well rounded, and it's fast enough to contest the best decks in the format. The balance changes also helped Kingsbane Rogue as Even Shaman's play rate has dropped. On that note, Even Shaman is one of the worst matchups for Kingsbane Rogue alongside Tempo Mage. These decks are just too fast and can outpressure the Rogue. The Rogue's best matchup is by far Big Priest, as the Rogue can push too much damage while removing the Priest's threats using Sap. Cube Warlock is next up on the list. This deck also found itself in Tier 2 previously, but has taken advantage of the meta and climbed up to a higher spot. Cube Warlock can outpressure a lot of the slower decks in the meta by making use of its ability to cheat out large minions. Cube Warlock preys on the aggressive forms of Paladin due to its wide arsenal of removal and its ability to summon huge taunts early. Decks that beat Cube Lock are the ones that can apply huge pressure while being able to bypass taunt minions. Kingsbane Rogue is a prime example of this due to the early damage they can produce and having Sap to ignore the taunts. Even Shaman remains in Tier 1 but falls within the tier. The deck is still a powerhouse, but the loss of Flame Tongue Totem is no joke. The deck sees a lot of play on ladder as it's still one of the best aggro decks out there. Even though it has an aggressive playstyle, some of its best matchups come from other aggro decks. Master's Call Hunter and Odd Rogue both struggle with the minions and constant clears that the Even Shaman can scramble together. Even Shaman has a hard time against control decks like reynad Priest. The healing and removal is just too much for the Shaman. Following Shaman is Big Priest, which climbed its way back into the top tier. Big Priest is similar to Cube Lock in the sense that it gets to cheat the mana curve by summoning large minions early. Instead of using copy effects like the Warlock, it uses resurrect spells to continue to snowball the game. A lot of the Priest's matchups are polarized. Against decks like Anyfin Paladin, the Priest is favored, but against decks like Kingsbane Rogue, it's difficult to find a win. Next up is Thune Warlock. This deck wasn't present on the tier list previously, but with all the standard players coming over, it became the new craze. The deck cycles fast and is able to reach its combo much quicker than most Thune decks. As expected with a combo deck, Thune Warlock does well against super slow decks such as Odd Warrior. Its bad matchups are decks that either run combo disruption or decks that are just too fast. The final deck of this tier is another Warlock deck. reynad Warlock fell from the second spot in Tier 1 as the meta became faster. This was partly due to all the new Wild players gravitating towards playing aggressive decks, and also due to one of its best matchups, Even Shaman, now seeing less play. The deck wants to play against slow decks like Odd Warrior, or passive aggro decks such as Odd Paladin. Its bad matchups are decks that can play huge early threats, much like Even Warlock is known for. Now, a large part of this snapshot features new decks. Due to this, it's hard to break down all the new ones. Some of the new decks you may not be familiar with on this snapshot include Thune Warlock, Master's Call Hunter, and Togwaggle Druid. Each one of these decks has game against the meta and are lists that you should consider learning if you want to play something new. Thune Warlock and Togwaggle Druid both offer a unique experience in the fact that they're both combo decks, but both play differently. Master's Call Hunter, on the other hand, is a mid-range deck that players who want to fight for board should look into picking up. The top decks of Tier 2 are all decks that recently fell out of Tier 1 due to how the meta shifted. With the new decks rising in power, the old ones fell through slightly. They're still strong, but have more bad matchups than their tier 1 counterparts. The first deck that has fallen from power is Andrey Paladin. This deck seemed impressive when it started showing up in the ladder, but as players became more experienced in how to play against it, the deck fell off slightly. The deck still has huge high roll potential though, which is hard to play around. Andrey Paladin players want to look to play against decks that can't deal with the endgame bursts such as Reno Priest. They wish to avoid playing against decks such as Cube Warlock as they struggle to pressure through the taunts. Next in tier 2 is Odd Warrior. This deck was also considered one of the best decks, but with combo decks such as Mecha Thune Warlock rising in popularity, its win rate drops. As with any control warrior type of deck, Odd Warrior is looking to queue into aggressive decks such as Even Shaman, while avoiding combo decks such as the previously mentioned Mecha Thune Warlock. The last deck we'll talk about in tier 2 is Odd Rogue. Odd Rogue fell from power as it's had bad or even matchups against all the top decks. The only reason it is rated so highly is the deck is easy to pilot and can punish players who are playing things that aren't top tier. Odd Rogue can squeeze out wins in spots where it looks behind, making it still a strong deck. Its best matchups, however, come from aggro decks that struggle to interact with the early minions in the rogue's hero power, such as Tempo Mage. The bad matchups belong to decks that can remove all the rogue's threats, such as Odd Warrior. Countering the top of the meta is a difficult feat when there are so many decks being played. Decks belonging to every tier have favorable matchups all around the tier list, making it a diverse meta. Depending on what you're queuing into, the deck that you want to play will change. Two decks that saw a rise in play rate and win rate with the meta shift are Aggro Paladin and Tempo Mage. These decks are ones worth picking up if you wish to play something new and gain an edge in the current metagame. Aggro Paladin fell off the face of the earth for a while, but makes a return due to the rise of both Rogue and the High Priest Thakal and Molten Giant combo. Giving an already decent deck such a huge swing turn has brought it back from the dead. If you're encountering a lot of slow Warlock decks on the ladder, consider staying away from the Paladin as it struggles against the mass removal that they have. The deck does well against most of the other top tier decks, making it a solid choice if you're not seeing too many Warlocks. Tempo Mage is an archetype that has been around for a long time. The deck is strong and versatile, giving it the ability to nut draw its way out of any matchup. Tempo Mage is a good pickup if you're encountering too many Warlocks for you to play Aggro Paladin, as this matchup is much better. If you're running into too many Odd Warriors or fast Paladin decks, consider playing something else. Both of these decks serve their purpose as meta counters, and they can cover one another's bases well. They're both great decks for ladder, and we recommend that you find one that fits your playstyle and experiment with it. The meta continues to shift daily, making it hard for players to pinpoint what the best decks are. With the continuously evolving meta, the top decks will change as players pick up other decks to counter what's best. Thank you for watching our breakdown of the Wild Meta Snapshot. We hope this helped you gain a better understanding of the current Wild Meta. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all our Hearthstone content. Until next time.